Logan was about to lose his fucking mind. When he came back to work for Bob Belcher in his stupid burger place, he thought the hardest part would be dealing with annoying customers and making special orders. Never in a million years would he have guessed that the biggest challenge he'd face at Bob's Burgers was Louise Belcher's tiny booty shorts.
Whatever, Mom. I'm back now, aren't I?
The 18-year-old sassed into her phone as she strode into the restaurant way past closing. Logan stopped wiping the counters to stare at the glitter-covered girl as she took a seat at the bar.
Yeah, I'll head up in a second. I'm just gonna grab a snack.
She hung up the phone and finally looked at him, heavily lined eyes trailing up his body until their eyes met.
"What are you doing out so late, Four Ears?"
he asked, turning his back on her to put away his rag and focus his thoughts on something other than the dark outline of her bra through her sheer white shirt.
Just got back from Rudy's birthday party. Not too many people showed, so we just went bar hopping instead.
Bar hopping?
He turned to her, arching a blonde eyebrow in surprise.
Yeah, and Mom's kind of pissed. That's why I'm letting her cool off a bit before I head upstairs,
she explained, reaching across the counter to grab a straw to chew on. His fingers twitched at his sides as he watched the plastic get crushed between her pearly teeth.
What are you still doing up? You know the place is closed, right?
Haha!
He deadpanned, rolling his eyes.
I couldn't sleep.
He gestured down to the basement that Bob has been letting him stay in until he got his own place. 25 and living in his boss's basement, not exactly where he saw himself going after he graduated college. 25 and crushing on his boss's barely legal, smart-mouthed, oh-so-fuckable daughter. Definitely not where he thought he'd be.
What? Too cold-blooded for the basement, Logan.
He glared at her and replied,
"It's like a fucking freezer down there."
Louise's eyes scanned him up and down, making him burn hot beneath his condiment-stained t-shirt. Every day, it got harder not to touch her. Whether to strangle or straddle her was usually the biggest question.
I bet I could warm it up,
she offered after a few beats of silence. Logan wasn't stupid. He knew what she meant. Still, he couldn't do anything but stare as she pulled herself onto the counter and sat on the freshly wiped surface directly across from him. In her tiny shorts, her legs went on for miles and they parted in a V so that if he wanted to, and he really fucking wanted to, he could step between them and press himself against her. Instead, he laughed lightly and took a step back.
"That's funny, Louise. Why don't you run upstairs to Mommy?" She sounded pretty upset.
He was pulling that out of his ass. Linda could have fallen asleep again for all he knew, but he needed something to stop him from doing something this stupid. Louise saw that and crossed her arms, pressing her chest together in a way that he couldn't tear his eyes from. She had that annoying look in her that she gets when she's about to start arguing with him over something stupid.
You don't think I can?
Something about her tiny self, perched on the countertop looking like sexy jailbait, made him forget who he was and why he couldn't do this for a split second. Under his breath, he grumbled,
"Oh, I know you can."
She smirked at that and leaned forward on her knees, so close that all he could see were her wide, young eyes. Fuck, he wanted everything from her.
Come on, Logan. Let me show you what I learned while you were away.
Those words reached into his dreams and pulled out all those sleepless nights he'd spend in college, jerking off to the thought of what she was doing and with who. What she would learn those little fingers could do, what she would realize that pretty mouth could make a man do for her. So young and so good, a shiver went down his spine. Then he remembered where they were. In her dad's restaurant, right in front of their big glass window. She had to know how much of a bad idea this was.
"Louise, you don't want this. You don't want me,"
he said, trying more to convince himself than her.
"You hate me."
I know.
Twisting her fingers into the hem of his t-shirt, she pulled him forward and into V of her legs. He just followed the pull, freezing in place when he felt her warm heat against his hard dick through his sweatpants.
"Shit."
She grinned rakishly and draped her arms around his shoulders, hanging off of him like a little girl. The mental comparison was too much for Logan to handle, so he stood stock still, looking over her shoulder at the mustard-colored walls.
You feel so much bigger than the boys at school,
She said, rolling her hips in a way that made him grunt and lean into her.
I bet you could fuck me better than them too.
That sentence, mixed with the feel of her moving against him, made him toss his head back and moan.
Fuck, I could.
When he realized what he'd said, his eyes went wide, and he tried to step back away from her. But she hooked her ankles behind his back and pulled their chests flush together.
Louise, we can't.
He groaned into her shoulder when she started rolling her hips again. He gripped the countertop like he wanted to take chunks of it back to bed with him. In reality, the only thing he wanted to take back to bed with him was mouthing at his neck like a pro and grinding against him like her life depended on it. It took all of his strength not to buck back into her. One hand snaked into his hair and yanked his head back to look her in the eye. He moaned at the sharp pain that made her smile.
I could make the basement feel so much more comfortable,
She promised with a wry grin. He could feel her nipples harden through his shirt. Logan gasped out.
Why are you doing this?
because I'm horny and you're insufferable and you deserve the sort of hell that will come with fucking the remaining innocence out of me.
He dragged out a low fuck under his breath, finally putting his hands on her to grip her bare thighs.
Fine, but only because you're so annoying that you wouldn't shut up about it if I said no.
She smiled. But then he bucked into her hard, and her eyelids dropped halfway, as did her jaw, taking handfuls of her tiny ass through her tiny shorts. Logan lifted her off the counter and carted her down the stairs to the basement, where she proceeded to make him lose his fucking mind.